if I want to capture the misery.
You don't want to capture this misery,
know.
you being sick all March? This is
Maybe.
great content. People love misery. People love hearing about other people's misery. Maybe, to some extent.
Inspire some gratitude, perhaps, if one is not sick.
Gratitude. Yeah, learn to appreciate kind of their own health.
The night before I left for London, I was like, oh no, I'm not getting sick. And I'm like, that night, I'm just telling myself, I'm not sick. I'm not sick. I feel great. I land in London. I'm like, just wrecked. Absolutely wrecked.
Yeah, sick and, oh, that's awful. That's a ruined day of work.
It's the root of all evil, of strife and upheaval.
Yeah, how's Tanya
doing? Yeah, she's doing better. I mean, we're recording, so she's doing okay. Although we did have a bit of a scare on Tuesday. Definitely, she wasn't feeling like it was getting better. So remember, this is the second go around. So she already had the detached retina and then the surgery, and she had to do it again. So she has something to compare it to, and she didn't feel like she was recovering at the same speed as the previous time. And in fact, it was kind of getting worse. And she was just really concerned. So we went in Tuesday, just called him up and was like, look, can you just take a quick look, make sure it's not infected and everything's still attached, stuff like that. So did that, and she was greatly relieved. She was under the pain. It wasn't pain that bothers her so much as the fear that something has gotten worse or bad. So that was good. Glad that we went in, and it was a big relief. So this is Thursday, and we have like a normal follow-up tomorrow. So don't expect, obviously, knock on wood, any bad news then. But so, modern medicine, man, really amazing. Really amazing. I mean, the doctor looked at her retina with some sort of special device. He took her pressure of her eye with another like special device thing, like kind of stuck it on her eye and pushed a button, and it was 14, whatever that means, which is right in the range that he wants. And apparently the range he wants is 14 to 17. Again, modern medicine. We complain about the healthcare system and stuff, but can't overlook the fact that modern medicine is pretty impressive. I wanted to get your update. I tried promoting one of our videos last week and just kind of big mess. First time done something like this. And at the end, I think I've decided maybe we should have IDs to vote in elections, Joe. I wanted to try to put $50 into promoting the previous episode. This was episode 81. And get an email shortly afterwards saying, I'm sorry, we're pausing your account. So I'm like, oh, okay, what's that about? They need to go and make sure it's a real person. So they need to verify that the root of all evil, this is like a real person. So they're asking for me to upload my license, give my address, stuff like that. Seems okay, fine. Then I do that. I think I'm done. Then I get another email. It says that our episode violated its Google Ads policy. And I was like, oh, which one? It luckily tells you which one. It's the election advertising in the US. So I was thinking back like, oh, that's strange. We didn't talk anything. There's no politics in that previous episode. We try to stay away from politics as much as we can, but just the nature of stuff we talk about, including fiscal policy, different regulations that are coming down the line. We're naturally going to touch upon the Trump administration. So it's like, okay,
politics in a way.
We look up in their policy, we see Google has an extremely broad definition of what constitutes an election ad. Basically, they're saying that if you feature any of the following, so if you basically mention the T word, and maybe we should start something where we just say like, Mr. TRUMP, or we start maybe we call him BSD, just to, and that luckily that way try to throw it, try to sneak something under here, because this is obviously not a campaign or ad or whatever. But they just have an extremely broad definition. And then it's like, okay, well, look, we're going to keep talking about these policy stuff. So the next thing they let you do is get verified to post campaign ads. So it's like, okay, fine. Let's call these episodes that we're doing campaign ads, because we do use the T word sometimes. Maybe some other senators that we mention. And that seemed okay. So what they asked me to do then is, okay, verify that you were a U.S. citizen. So the only thing I really had to do, I put in a phone number, and then I uploaded my passport, basically, just to verify that I was a U.S. citizen. And I'm doing this whole thing, and I'm like, geez, just to sort of promote one of these put $50 behind a little video just to see kind of what YouTube would do with it, I need to verify that I'm a US citizen. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe you should also verify you're a US citizen when you actually vote. And that definitely crossed my mind as I was like going through this whole process for election integrity and all that. I mean, it's like, ugh. So come on.
It's just, it gets to a point where it seems a little bit egregious. Like you have to
No, it's
upload
absurd.
your passport information.
Joe, I can
like,
feel you drawing me into this. I'm telling you to stop. I'm asking you to stop. No, I mean, don't let me like go on a rant about how, like you need to compare it to like Jim Crow. And I heard some other arguments. And I just thought every argument was just awful or backwards, even just opposite. It was like, we are not going to have, we're not going to require ID to vote to protect democracy and to, ensure the integrity of the election. That's literally like one of the arguments that some elected official was reading off of a piece of paper. And I was like, oh man, you got this backwards. And like somebody wrote that down, which means somebody actually thought about this and they like put it in. She was reading it. I don't know, man. Again, hey, okay. We got a lot to do. We got a lot of stuff, important financial stuff to cover. Let's get to it. But I wanted to relay that story about. So yeah, I am still curious. I'm really curious to see what $50 on YouTube gets us. Who knows? Whatever. Let's try it. Just experimenting. Just trying stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Oil markets, energy markets, oil, Iran. What's going on? You just look at the price chart of oil. Really, no one knows what's happening to it. Extremely volatile, kind of day after day. It'll shoot up multiple percent one day, fall down the next. But it's very clear it's only going in one direction. The news earlier today was Iran is now striking energy infrastructure in the Persian Gulf region. That's a considerable escalation, especially with regards to energy. So key question, I think, to financial markets, monetary policy, even politics is, when does this supply shock we're seeing in oil turn into a growth demand shock? So just as a quick background, it is true that Iranian oil, really was not sold to, many places around the world. It's been shut out by the West from the global financial system for many years now. But it seems like the big thing that people discounted earlier on is the amount of influence that Iran ultimately has over the Strait of Hormuz. Not everyone buys oil from Iran or even from those, Middle Eastern states, but something like a fifth of the world's oil goes through that strait just in terms of transit. So oil prices have just shot straight upward. They're roughly 30% higher now than they were just ahead of this conflict, and it's been higher before that, but it's a really, really big increase right now.
Can I also just like one of the things that I think I learned kind of going back to this, and I thought one thing I really underestimated had to do with how, I don't want to make this as a criticism or something, but almost how skittish the captains of the oil tankers are. In retrospect, it makes a lot of sense. Like there's a chance that someone's going to blow up your ship, even if that chance is still relatively small. The fact that it's not zero is just causing them to stop. One thing that comes to mind is one of Trump's tweets, when in all caps he wrote at the end, "Show some guts," shows me that I think he too probably underestimated how skittish they would do it. So even if you did, quote unquote, if the US did manage to, quote unquote, control the strait, as maybe, I don't know, his generals predicted that they could, and they do, the fact that there's a chance that Iran could shoot it down is just going to stop any of the tankers. They could get insurance, or maybe they could do this. They're still not going to drive through. And that's something I definitely didn't appreciate. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in this, but it's one of the things that one of the little mental notes I'm making if I try to predict something like this in the future.
So right now, still, this is fundamentally a supply shock. So just from that strait being closed, oil production has declined substantially. the oil is still there. The companies are still there, ready and willing to drill. They just have nothing to do with it. So they've had to stop. And this is really similar to what we saw over a few years ago now, back in 2022, at the start of the Ukraine war. That was a big energy shock. Soon after that war began, the West very quickly just completely shut out Russia from basically all of global trade in a very aggressive way. Europe suddenly had no way of getting natural gas. Their prices, tripled overnight. But it was very short-lived because there wasn't a kind of core piece of infrastructure that had the ability to stop that energy production over the long term. And that became clear just as the conflict kind of evolved. So that's still ongoing now for 4 years. But that energy shock itself did not persist for very long. So I think oil increased there something like 30%, but even within a month later, it was already back down to where it was. And 1 year into the conflict, oil was like 20 to 30% cheaper than before the war began. So that is kind of a clean supply shock that came and went, didn't really have any impact on the global economy. One last example I wanted to give is the 2003 start of the Iraq War. That one was different than this in that the start of the conflict was very geopolitically contained. So it wasn't a clear supply shock like we've been talking about in these two recent conflicts. But it was a very protracted, long conflict that went on for many years, obviously, and the price of oil nearly tripled over a 5-year period. And so that inflicted just really great economic pain on the US, especially because they were a net oil importer at the time. So to put it concisely, that was a demand shock. The two we're seeing so far are clear supply shocks, but this one, as of today, it's still a supply shock. The question is, does it turn into a demand shock? And if it does, what are some ways in which that could happen? And what does it all mean?
Any idea on things to look out for? Like when does something, or are there any indicators for when an oil supply shock starts turning into a, econ demand shock?
Economists' rule of thumb is something like it takes something like 3 to 6 months for the impact of oil on headline inflation to start increasing in core inflation. In other words, oil will eventually start turning into a demand shock. Economists roughly think between 3 to 6 months. That's very back of the envelope. No one really knows.
I saw something that stuck with me as I was scrolling through X. Somebody showed a graph basically that said anytime the oil price gets above 50%, what the running average is, there's a recession. Every single time. And this passed that mark. It's like we were running at like 60 something, 70, and then 50% more than that. So you add like 35, something like that to it. You're over 120. We're already over that 50% over marks. That's his indirect saying of, he's predicting a recession coming.
The outsized impact that oil has on the global economy really is pretty interesting. Like, it's tough to have reliable recession indicators. The only other one I would say is the shape of the Treasury curve. Once the Treasury curve inverts, a recession is coming. I actually wasn't even familiar about that oil one, but as we're talking about it here, it makes total sense. Oil isn't just a one-off commodity. It's kind of an input for everything. Everything in the economy requires energy. So it just has such a broad-reaching impact.
Yeah. There's hydrocarbons, man. They're useful in plastics, fertilizer, all sorts of just basic stuff that you need. So what does that mean then, with this huge potentially shock that's coming down? What are some of the implications, would you say, for central bank policy? I know just today, FOMC met. And, breaking news, although this is going to be published several days after we recorded, today's a Thursday, the 19th, they kept rates flat. But kind of what are some of the things they're thinking about? Any idea?
That's really been the central question to all the central banks. In the past 2 days, we've actually had central bank meetings from the Fed, the Bank of England, European Central Bank, and the Bank of Japan. And the view was pretty much the same consistently. Central banks are being very, very cautious about this because they're in a really tight spot right now. All of these regions are facing weakening labor markets. We see it in the US, we see it in the UK, we see it in Japan for a very long time. So that kind of makes you lean towards easing policy, cutting interest rates. And in fact, indeed, that's what we've been talking about for like the past year now. How much are central banks going to cut? How much more do they need to cut? When are they going to cut? This could be kind of an inflection point to that story because now there's another real inflation shock on our hands. This higher price of oil, it's been around almost a month now. Just mechanically, we're going to see higher CPI, across the board, across these regions now over the next month at least. If it goes through, 3 months, 6 months, then it's in core inflation. That's a really big issue for central banks.
If you're talking about the oil shock going to be hitting prices and pushing up inflation, but we just finished saying how this might turn into a demand shock, which is analogous, and how a recession might come around, and that means cutting rates. So is there any indication that they're afraid of like a stagflation scenario in which stagflation, so that's the economy growth has stagnated, it's not growing, but then there's inflation. It's almost kind of like what you're describing. Worst of both worlds.
That's they're staring down the barrel of that worst case scenario right now.
That's a crappy scenario. Because then it's like, what do you do? Do you cut rates to kind of improve growth, or do you increase them to tamp down on inflation? What would you do, Joe?
I'm glad that I'm not Jay Powell right now.
Well, he's on his way out. He doesn't care. If anything, he's like, a rat. He's like, oh man, just in time. That sounds like you guys have some tough decisions to make. Blood's not on my hands.
It really is just fundamentally the toughest question that at least the Fed can see. Their dual mandate, they need to support the labor market and keep inflation down.
Try mandate, Joe. Try mandate. I think we have to start that here. It starts here, the try mandate. And they also have to keep long-term rates moderate. Joe. It's in there. They wrote it down. You're looking at me like I'm...
Did they? Wait,
like I'm going crazy. They wrote it down. It's in there.
What you're talking about?
Oh, Joe. Oh, yeah. Give me this chance. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
It's a try mandate. They added to it way after the fact, like in 1977. So the monetary policy objectives. The Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System and the Federal Open Market Committee shall maintain long-run growth of the monetary and credit aggregates commensurate with the economy's long-run potential to increase production so as to promote effectively the goals of maximum employment, stable prices, and moderate long-term interest rates. And that last one, I think, was added in like 1977 or something, or 1988. It was added later.
This is blowing my mind.
I just blew your mind, baby. So I think we got to start here. Everyone talks about a dual mandate, and they're wrong. It's a try mandate.
I don't even know what to do with this right
now.
Joe!
Joe! It's a try mandate. So you can be, the viewers at home, if you want to sound like a pedantic asshole, come here to the Root of All Evil podcast. And when people start saying some finance bro, whatever, is like, oh, you got to respect the dual, you're like, actually, it's a try mandate. And there's the fucking proof. I mean, we can get like a history lesson. In fact, let's ask Grok. Federal Reserve Reform Act of 1977. So, and I don't know, it says here, the 1970s was a time of high inflation and unemployment, collectively referred to as stagflation, led to the enactment of the Reform Act in November 1977.
Really? Okay, so that technically is still in place, but in reality,
the third goal, although the Reform Act directs the Federal Reserve to pursue three policy goals, the Federal Reserve focuses on employment and prices. The third goal, quote, moderate long-term interest rates, is often not explicitly discussed. Oh, I was kind of hoping to say why they added that.
Yeah, exactly. That's my next question. Like, because the 1970s is like the canonical example of stagflation. So this seems like a very deliberate response to that. It would, I guess I've got some homework to do here after this to figure out what that motivation was.
Put it in there.
Because we're kind of standing at a crossroads right now. Like I don't think that that's the most likely scenario at this point, but it's the most likely it's been, I don't know, at least since, the other mini oil shock we saw 4 years ago now.
So it says, according to Grok, the moderate long-term interest rates clause, this third goal was added as a complementary objective. It reflected the understanding that sustainably low and stable long-term interest rates, e.g. on bonds and mortgages, are a byproduct of a healthy macroeconomic environment. Specifically, low inflation expectations and overall stability. I mean, sure. So call it 2.5 mandates, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah, because that's the other famous thing, we've mentioned here before that Greenspan talked about, the inability of controlling the long end. And, obviously because now there is something to directly control long end interest rates, balance sheet policy. But then, so you could argue,
right,
they'll just use that.
QE, yeah.
That's talking about it with an explicit link to, that tri-mandate of long-term interest rates. That's, I think literally yield curve control at that point. And, this is back to our Dario cycles now. Once the central bank starts monetizing the government's debt, that's not a great place to be. So QE doesn't seem like the angle to pursue something like that. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see if that is something that central banks start talking about again. I personally think there's no chance.
Sorry, no chance of what? You're talking about of QE, of trying to moderate the long-term interest rates? How did we get there? What are we talking about?
After stagflation of the 70s, they made this explicit change to include moderate long-term interest rates. So my question was, do we see central bank officials start talking about that kind of objective as well later this decade, should this turn into another stagflationary scenario? And if they do, what can they do about it?
Got it. I got it. Okay. That was tough. I really, I need to do a little brush up on my history here, my economic history of how they got out of stagflation. I don't know. I don't think we're going to cover it here, but that would be interesting. Because maybe we're headed towards that. I like to have the tools in the toolbox nice and sharp.
Definitely.
All right.
One of the other things that came up this week, new tax policy. So one of the things that was going around is this idea of this AI tax. So it was in the news this week because Andrew Yang was on CNBC and talked about it. Then he wrote some posts about it. But it originally came from the CEO of Anthropic late last year, basically saying that there should be some sort of tax on AI usage.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew Yang is a politician and just did some fantastic marketing for it, where he's like, wait a minute, we don't want to tax people and labor. We want to tax AI. What if labor, you and me, didn't have any taxes and we just taxed these agentic AIs to pay for everything? That's a great marketing. That's grade A politician. Yeah. All the Anthropic CEO did, Dario, in, like you said, 2025, he basically said, 3% of revenue from AI model usage. So maybe you could have it tied to tokens or something, processed or generated. But, to Yang's credit, definitely better marketing.
Absolutely. And, that's kind of interesting. Like how do you handle tax policy when labor is not the main contributor to tax income? So it's like, we've talked about this in the past, right? Before, World War II, the income tax was like a really minimal amount of the overall tax revenue, right? And then after World War II, and it stayed that way, it now is, the vast majority of tax revenue. Is there a world where we can get back to that, where the U.S. tax revenue is not driven by income tax anymore?
And it's just generated by token tax? That's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Number of tokens that go through AI. I don't know. I mean, right now, it just sounds like you'll be taxing AI companies. You're not really... I mean, the thing is, like, nowadays, taxes are all done on flows, not stocks. So, like, or not all of them. But mostly we're okay. We seem to be okay with taxing transactions. So like a transaction between an employer paying an employee, that gets taxed. Sales tax. If I want to swap one good for some money, slice a bit off of that and tax that. It's not totally clear what the transaction is going on like right now with an AI. So like there's not a back and forth. It's not like, okay, hey AI, I give you money, you give me some service. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. Right now I guess there are subscription fees, so maybe they might tax. Basically what it is, it's like a tax on those subscription fees, right? I mean, or
as it would be today. But I think
as it would be today, yeah. If you get to a point where these agentic AIs can individually or something provide a service for which you pay them money, then there would be a tax on that. But like at the end of the day, who's paying for these taxes? It's still people. I mean, it's still people who are utilizing them. So I guess it would be more of some sort of a consumption tax, like a sales tax on AI agents.
businesses as well, would be a big contributor to this, because let's say, you do lay off a bunch of people and you instead replace it with AI one for one, whatever that means, and like whatever way you measure that. That gives the business kind of a natural incentive to, fire less people to minimize the taxes that they pay. So that's one way of looking at it. But if it just makes sense to just totally replace the people, there's going to be a significant cost in using these AI systems. So does it fall on the business? Does it fall on?
I mean,
Yeah,
maybe. I guess. I mean, so I guess there are two things you can kind of think of. Is what he wants to do is say, okay, we're no longer going to do an income tax for individuals. So now I wake up tomorrow, my income no longer gets taxed. What's going to happen? Is the employer going to start paying me less in order to sort of get back some of that money, or am I going to get a huge windfall in terms of how much I'm making? Probably the latter. So the employer is still paying the same amount. But then on the other half, they're looking at AI, and now all of a sudden AI maybe is not generating, or I got to pay some sort of income tax maybe for them. Now it might still make sense though, because it doesn't cost an AI. If AI is going to be so great, then whatever percentage tax that they're going to recoup because they don't have to pay me, or like that I'm going to get from this windfall, I'm not going to be, or like the AI isn't going to just be 20% more productive. It's going to be like 100% more productive or something than I am. So like they're still going to choose the AI. It's not like, the point is like, if one of the things that Andrew Yang wants to do is to save people their jobs, I don't think this is going to work. Unless the AI tax is like, 99% or something.
I don't think AI wants to save people's jobs, or at least like, Andrew Yang was the UBI candidate in 2016. So that's always kind of been his thing. I think this is a way of, one, funding UBI. It's like he's not trying to, like, I think he's fine if everyone loses their job. Like in theory, now you've got this replacement tax though to give people income. And also just like it kind of could slow the overall transition, slow the shock of this kind of AI job displacement. If you increase its cost, it's going to be used relatively less. Maybe you save some jobs over the shorter term. But I agree, in this view, you're not really going to be saving any jobs.
Yeah.
But you are establishing this new way of getting income tax.
I was going to say, the other thing that we just kind of realized is the marketing is so good that we even just skipped over what our initial reaction should be, which is just enough with the taxes. Stop with the taxes, cut the spending. You see how he did that? We just skipped that whole part. I mean, the initial reaction is no, just get spending under control, please. Isn't there a new, I guess, autism or something, fraud scam going on around in California now? They're starting to uncover those. I mean, the government is just not a good steward of capital. So stop asking for more money. Just clean up the house. Like that should be the position. It's just like enough with it. I mean, how could they do that? So they have daycare centers now, autism, and I just can't wait for like the next set of, oh man, he's already out with another video, surely. And there actually are
Really?
copycats. Did you see those? They're like copycat
No, I
people
didn't.
going around different, some like random dude. He's
Yeah,
like
just like
knocking on
checking it
doors,
out.
and it's like, oh, thank God, you know. Yeah, I wish I had the courage and the time to do that because this is so fantastically important. This guy's driving like a BMW M4 or something, and it's just like some BS autism place. I can't handle it. And the guy's just like, dude, man, can you just leave me alone? To like Nick Shirley, he's like, dude, can you just
I got a really good grift
can you
going.
just be cool, bro? Can I just go? Can you let me go? He's like in the car. He's like in the car, trying to drive away. He doesn't do jack shit. It's just some kid.
Jeez.
Man, so then they're like, all right, well, we got to tax this. And they're like, okay, enough with the taxes. But that's definitely a little bit of our libertarian things. I don't think it's unreasonable. Please just demonstrate that you're a good steward of capital.
Are these scams aren't these like state-sponsored scams that are going on? Like, I guess
State sponsored? Oh, that's
well, no, so I mean like state government. Like the funds come from the state government.
I see
not
what you
from the
mean.
Federal
Okay.
government.
I thought you were implying that the
No.
yeah. All right.
I mean, could be.
Could be. Probably some kickbacks. Ooh, now you're getting into some.
I mean, there almost certainly is, but yeah.
Oh, Joe, careful! Whoa!
These YouTube ads are never going to go through.
I know exactly. You can just forget about our YouTube ad campaign of $50.
Would the AI tax though be through the federal government, and then be in use for something like UBI? It would be of like such monumentally high importance that it would be nationwide. People would.
You
be
don't
talking
think
about it
you don't think
everywhere.
that UBI thing is going to be absolutely scammed to death?
Well, but that's the great thing about UBI is that.
Do you know how many? It's just going to be like one person with 100 dead relatives or something.
Well, sure. I mean, that's going to happen, but it's better than people fraudulently saying, we need money
sure.
for infrastructure to provide healthcare to people that doesn't actually exist. But UBI is like everyone just gets the same amount. It's easier to distribute. It's easier to track. It's just much cleaner.
Oh man, I don't know. And the more I think about it, and then like the amount of redemptions or whatever that go overseas, this is going to be such, I don't know, come to think of it, the practical issues associated with UBI now, just starting to think about it, so many scams. They're going to be people, we're basically going to be UBI for the whole world, and it's going to end the United States. That's my prediction now that I just made in the last 15 seconds.
Well, I mean, for sure, if we continue like unabated immigration, that's
no, even without that.
Clearly, with this administration, it's turned around, at least for now. But yeah, obviously into the future.
I don't know, man. There are whole call centers out there overseas that are full-time employees just working day in and day out just to maybe scam a couple people. Like the amount of brain power that are put into trying to scam people, and to think that there is a system now where they're just giving out free money as long as you show what. Like we obviously don't know any of this quite yet, but I imagine they'll put so much effort into finding ways around. Anyway, I don't want to go down this route, but like that was just a sudden fear I had about, oh man, UBI practically it's like not possible without basically providing UBI to the entire world.
Yeah, but you're talking like this would increase scams from people who live and exist overseas to extract UBI from American citizens. Is that the idea?
Yeah. Not even extract UBI from American citizens. It's just like trying to make fake people.
Yeah, well, that's a separate problem from UBI. Like, I agree, that's going to be a problem, and it is a problem. But
anyway, UBI, AI tax, sounds great. Fantastic marketing from Yang. Not his idea. It was the Anthropic CEO, and you got other questions you need to think about as to why he suggested that. I don't know why he would be like, hey, you guys should tax us a little more or something. Maybe this is him building a moat. That's what it feels like, but I don't know.
This one's actually really interesting. I don't want to go down a tangent, but this Anthropic CEO is like super interesting.
All right, I don't know anything about him other than he's, I think, pissing off a lot of people in. Is that this guy? A lot of people at the Pentagon.
He was an executive at OpenAI. He left in 2021 because he was concerned that OpenAI is not being safe with AI. they're, recklessly developing and it's going to cause huge issues. So he started Anthropic. And the whole point of Anthropic is to give this like humanity focused AI. This guy, Dario, he's got his own website where he posts these long blog posts before. They're actually really interesting. I would recommend them to you. His whole thing is about coming up with responsible AI use. And, so he's the CEO. So he's talking about, these days, the societal impact. So everything that he does is like, his self-expressed, at least, he could be building a moat, but I've read and heard so much from him at this point, I would tend to believe him. Actually, he takes this very like principled approach in responsible AI usage. And that's ultimately what caused the issue with the Pentagon contract. He just like drew a line in the sand and said, we don't agree with this usage. You won't say, we don't have adequate controls in place to ensure that. So it fell apart. That was a huge decision. At the same time, just a couple months earlier, he is publicly saying, yes, you should tax AI companies. You should tax me. Why else would someone do that? There's not a great reason, but with the full context of who this guy is and what his history is and all his writing online, even all of the public research from Anthropic that I've been looking through, it's all very focused on understanding AI systems. So that's a different topic. We should probably talk about it later, but that's the motivation I see from the CEO.
You think it's genuine? Yeah, okay. You think it's genuine, all right.
Mm-hmm.
So you think he's Anthropic? He's extremely principled.
I think so. I
don't have any opinion. Love to go 12 rounds with you, but I really don't know anything about it. I got all right, Joe. I got two things for you this past week. One of them happened just today, but that's the kind of new capital rule we have. But first, I want to talk to you about the draft of the 15th five-year plan was just released earlier this week. This is a big deal. These things only come around every 5 years. Able to provide a little bit of insight into how the very secretive, heads of the Chinese Communist Party is thinking about the future, about their own country, what sort of problems they're facing. I was trying to think about how best to do this because obviously this thing is an incredibly long document. So this is the Chinese. There's only an official Chinese version out there now. That I'm aware of anyway. Again, this is March 19th. This thing's 141 pages. Just want to show you what this thing looks like. Joe, take a look. They got lots of, you could see lots of text, but I want to show you they got some maps. They got some tables. They have some numbers. They've got, lots of really juicy stuff that you can dig into. I'm going to look up a separate one that came out. Before I get to that one, I do want to dig into that at some point. I haven't had time to yet, but there was another sort of English version, Premier of the State Council report on the work of the government that sort of went along, that was sent up to the Politburo. I went through it and I made a couple notes, a couple comments that I wanted to relay to you. But even before I do that, I thought it was interesting to talk about who is Xi Jinping. Like, what do you know about this guy's background? I just thought that it was interesting. So I'm reading a book right now, Destined for War. This is by this guy, Allison. And he apparently wrote the definitive account of back in like 2017 or something between the US and China and all that. And I kind of wanted to pick it up, wanted to read about it. And as there were a couple parts when I was reading this report on the work of the government that really reminded me of two paragraphs that I'm going to ask you to read now, just talking about Xi Jinping, if you don't mind. So what would you say? Do you mind giving this a read?
Who is, and my pronunciation is not as good as yours, Luke, but Xi Jinping. He was born a princeling of the revolution, the son of a trusted colleague of Mao, Vice Premier Shi Zhongxun, who had fought alongside him in the Chinese Civil War. Destined to bring up Beijing's cradle of leaders, he awoke shortly after his 9th birthday in 1962 to discover that a paranoid Mao had arrested his father. In the days that followed, His father was humiliated and eventually imprisoned for the duration of the Cultural Revolution. During what she describes as a dystopian period, Red Guards repeatedly forced him to denounce his own father. When his school closed, spent his days defending himself in street fights and stealing books from shuttered libraries to try to educate himself. Sent to the countryside by Mao to be re-educated, Xi found himself living in a cave in a rural village of Yan'an, shoveling dung and snapping to the demands of his peasant foreman. Depressed by deprivation and abuse, his older half-sister, Xi Heping, hanged herself from a shower rail. I did not know any of
Bet you didn't know any of that, did you? Yeah.
political background, kind of a political dynasty, and
He did. He did. But then Mao's paranoia forced his father out and kicked him out.
I did not know any of that.
Yeah. How did C respond?
Instead of suicide, she chose to embrace the reality of the jungle. There, in his apt word, he was reborn. As one of his longtime friends told an American diplomat, he, quote, chose to survive by becoming redder than red and doing whatever it took to claw his way back to the top. She was nothing if not persistent. The leader of 1.4 billion people in a communist party with 89 million members was actually rejected the first 9 times he sought to join the party, succeeding finally on his 10th attempt. That's incredible. I assumed he was just born into the party and,
No.
just
The other thing that sort of struck me that really stayed with me, I read I think John Kennedy. So he's a senator. He's a current sitting U.S. senator. He's the guy. He's got the stock Southern accent, and he makes weird comparisons, really funny, weird things that don't make a whole lot of sense. Like, I bet he was running faster than a chicken chasing a ham sandwich, and you're like, oh, what? Like, oh, I guess that's
how often
fast.
does that happen?
Yeah, oh, is that fast? I guess that's fast. And Kennedy described him as a quote unquote hard man because he sat across from him a couple times. Like, he went over to China and he met him. But Kennedy, and I trust his judgment on someone's character, described C as a hard man. So that's the head of China. And this, I don't know if you know this, but really So C is really focused, centralizing power, all that. This is kind of old news, but back when he came to power in 2012, goes through different, corruption scandals and all that, and he really purges corruption. They really see that as a serious problem. Naturally, you can also see viewing purging corruption, quote unquote, as consolidating power. He managed to successfully, I guess, bypass or outlive the typical terms of the heads of state. And I'll give you a couple other examples that's written into the language of this. That's also kind of shown how he's really become from just a nameless and mindless technocrat, as usual, the really head people of China used to be, like Hu Jintao, into an autocrat. But let me just go through this, real quick. A couple of the comments that I wanted to make. This 47-page document. This is not the entire thing, obviously. Chinese also, when you translate it into English, the word count or just the length becomes much, much longer. Chinese is a very space efficient language. So like if you translated that other 141-page document, you'd get a really, really long. So the fact that this one's just 47, this is really just a small clip of it. But I still think it had a couple points in there that were really interesting, which I want to share to you. So first, the way they organize it starts off by talking about all their accomplishments. Couple things: research, development of AI, biomedicine, robotics, quantum technology. They highlight chips. I don't know if you know this, but last year the Chinese sent off a probe into an interplanetary exploration mission. They have navigation satellite systems. And they also, one thing I noted was China's first domestically built aircraft carrier. And they've got an electromagnetic catapult system that they're touting. Another kind of line I want to read here. It says, quote, domestically, the economy remained in the midst of a profound transformation, deep-seated structural problems have become more pronounced, and consumption and investment lacked adequate growth momentum. Now that's kind of it's remarkable, if only for how forthcoming they are with their shortcomings, right? You wouldn't always, if you were to like open this up, I don't think a normal person would expect them to be so critical of themselves, right? A lot of times these kind of super powerful governments want to show they're just great, everything's perfect all the time. No, they're looking at this with both eyes open. So you gotta tip your hat there.
I mean, that's been something that's long publicly expressed by the government, though, shifting to a consumption-based economy.
Yeah, but to use the language like deep-seated structural problems have become more pronounced, to be forthcoming like that. The other thing I wanted to highlight, the next thing it says, the party central committee with Comrade Xi Jinping at its core. And you'll see throughout this entire document, anytime they refer to Xi Jinping, they'll add that at its core, like with Xi Jinping at its core. That is a notable addition. So again, another thing from that book, Destined for War, Allison, he observed that Xi took his new core leader title, which characterizes his consolidation of power. He has like 20 or something different titles, just the head of every different, part of the government, the military, just everything. So I read this one, and I read this sentence, and it reminded me of something that I wanted to relay to you. It said, in this document, we're only on page 3 here. Once again, it has been showed that upholding the centralized, unified leadership of the party central committee is the fundamental guarantee for overcoming all difficulties and advancing all of our work. So another thing that I wanted to mention, again, this is very much at the top of my mind because I'm reading that book, Destined for War, but the author, Allison, relayed in the book that there were 3 lessons that Xi learned from the collapse of the Soviet Union. He says that Gorbachev made 3 mistakes. The 3 errors that Gorbachev made, 1 was that he relaxed political control. 2 was that he allowed corruption. And 3 was that he nationalized the Soviet military. So in practice, I think Xi needs to maintain a sense of fear or power. So one of the things that Gorbachev said was that, quote, do not be afraid of the KGB. And that's a huge mistake because in the book, he basically writes that was the KGB was the terror machine that holds the damn pile together.
Yeah.
They were holding everything together. Now, number 2, the anti-corruption campaign, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, something that Xi has done a lot of, has been very forceful about, and it's throughout this whole thing. They even called it out, saying that corruption is still bad. And then 3, the military, for it to nationalize the Soviet military, basically saying the military is loyal to the country. That's wrong. The military is not loyal to the country, Joe. What is it loyal to?
People.
The party. No, Joe, you got it wrong. No, it's the party. So I mentioned before they were forthcoming with their issues. Here's another paragraph.
There's also room for improvement in the work of the government. Some policies, upon implementation, have not delivered as expected. Some officials lack the ability and solutions needed to drive high-quality development. Some officials have a misguided understanding of what it means to perform well. They lack drive, act arbitrarily, work for show, or just go through the motions in their work. Corruption still occurs frequently in some sectors and localities.
I mean, again, pretty forthcoming in the admission of false ways to improve. Some of the things, certainly when they say they work for show and go through the motions, oh man, that hits home. I think anyone in corporate America, I think, is probably knows what that might be referring to. I think they've seen it here and there. Just cover your ass all the way down. So here's the big one. There was a little bit of buzz a while back when China was forthcoming and they came out and they said the GDP growth target is no longer be 5+%. They came out and they said it's going to be 4.5 to 5%. And then all the commentators, people like us, came out and said, oh my God, look at this. What does this mean? They're not the engine. It's all going to crap, all that stuff. And people who want that message ate it up, got a lot of views, all that stuff. But that's really just one bullet in when they wrote the main targets for development this year are as follows. That's really only one bullet of 8, which that were not mentioned. So I think for the sake of completeness, why don't we at least talk about the other bullet points that they had mentioned? So really points 2 to 4 here are sort of related to central bank's mandate. So the second one, surveyed urban unemployment rate of around 5.5%, over 12 million new urban jobs, CPI increase of around 2%. Just as somebody as a market watcher yourself, Joe, what is
Yeah.
sort of your initial reaction here? And by the way, I'll mention I looked up briefly the current quote unquote surveyed urban unemployment rate is apparently around 5.1%. I know there's a different story going out there with youth unemployment being much higher. And then the CPI lately is up 1.3%, according to Grok. But what's your initial reaction?
Well, yeah, I mean, you already started to say it, outlining explicit goals for jobs and inflation. You know, in the U.S. and the West, that's monetary policy that's separate from government. In China, it's very clear. You know, all these things work together, but all these things are now planned and executed by the same entities as well.
But what do you think about the targets? Like, what do these numbers kind of say to you? First off, just looking at that urban jobs, 12 million, and we're talking about like how many new jobs in the U.S. We're like sort of wringing our hands over 100,000 jobs. 12 million new urban jobs. That's a million new jobs a month. 12 million new urban jobs. A million a month. How does that sound?
Sounds pretty
Joe?
aggressive. You know, yeah. In the U.S., 200,000 a month is like a healthy rate. China
Okay.
has nearly 5 times the population of the U.S., so it's not
4. 4.
Is it 4? Okay. Yeah. All right. So it's 25% higher is their goal than what the U.S. deems as a long run. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't sound wildly off. Just the population is so huge. It is interesting that they don't call out something about. Well, I was going to say something about the youth, like because you already called out the youth.
Yeah, and they also think it's like the quote unquote surveyed urban unemployment rate. So they're not looking at rural, and I guess they're not looking at. I don't know what surveyed means exactly. That's one of the things you would want to drill into. Maybe that's just a title for it.
That's the planned ambiguity.
Maybe. And CPI increase of around 2%. I mean, that's just like locks. That feels like it's just a number taken from the US. It's just like, all right, I guess 2% is the number. All right, the next one. Personal income growth in step with economic growth.
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a nod towards the sort of consumer consumption driven economy. They don't want this thing, taken off just with investment and stuff. The next one, a basic equilibrium in the balance of payments, was kind of shocking to me because it definitely goes against my understanding of sort of what they want their growth to be. I mean, if they're going to be an export dependent, as they're definitely painted in the West as the engine, their economic engine is driven by exports. From the right in this kind of 5-year plan, a quote unquote basic equilibrium in the balance of payments shocked me a bit.
Well, that's also consistent with consumption driven because they are still a export driven, which is,
True.
just mechanically you're going to have huge surpluses. They want to balance that out more. And then like even in that way, like also consistent with personal income growth in step with economic growth. It's all back to that consumption point. I didn't think about it that way at first.
Next one, it says a grain output of around 700 million metric tons. This one's really just here for tradition. I mean, we all know communist countries, they just love talking about grain production. No, I'm kidding. I don't, although I did sort of snicker at that thought. Like, oh, okay. I think that's probably a national security thing. They don't want to be dependent on other countries for food. This one's the next one, a reduction of around 3.8% in carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP. Now, that's a very specific metric. Okay. It's not a 3.8% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. No, it's this relatively small percent emission reduction per unit of GDP. So they have every intention that total CO2 emissions is going to continue to grow. And I think they mentioned later that that it will continue until like 2030.
I wonder what the rationale for including that is. There's not a great.
They sort of break up their goals into different segments, and this is taken from like the greening kind of, just because it's not just an economic policy, it's also a social one where they want to just improve overall, the environment. They don't want them eating smog, stuff like that is also covered in 5-year plans. It's not just economic. Back to the CPI one, I think they elaborated on it a little bit more in a paragraph later. They wrote, a projected CPI increase of approximately 2% is feasible and will help guide expectations. By better balancing total supply and demand, we will steer general price levels back into positive territory and produce a reasonable, modest rebound in consumer prices to facilitate a virtuous cycle in the economy.
Deflation, they're worried.
Yeah, exactly. That was my take. So they're definitely, that's just straight up saying like, okay, yeah, we're having a problem with deflation. We're going to try to get this back. We're going to deal it with total supply and demand, which we talked about. The other interesting thing is typically criticized by being too much supply. So supply is pushing down the prices. It's not necessarily, maybe it is in part a demand problem, but if China's got its pedal to the metal, it's producing a whole bunch of stuff.
Supply problem.
There's going to be some tightrope walking that they need to do with regards to some of the other goals in here. It talks about modernizing its manufacturing base and all that. So that's putting the more pedal to the metal on the supply side. So if they're trying to do that while also managing sort of CPI and stuff, it's just a tightrope. It's just a policy give and take here. So again, this is a super interesting document for any China watchers. And that's all I'm going to cover right now. Again, you could spend a whole series going through this and explaining why all this is interesting. They talk about later, we will continue to implement a more proactive fiscal policy, and they start talking about how much they're going to run their deficit. They talk about keeping their belt tightened. That sounds like language directly from Xi. They started talking about sort of domestic market and how they want to advance special initiatives to boost consumption. The way they're going to do that, they decided, seems with trade-in programs. So they're going to subsidize trade-in programs. So they're trying to convince people to trade in sort of older equipment for newer ones, and that's going to boost consumption.
Cash for clunkers.
Cash for clunkers, exactly. Something like that. The other thing they're looking at is to broaden sort of loan interest subsidies for personal consumers to try to boost consumption. And that is the last point that I want to make here is like, that's big. I mean, the ability for Americans, maybe are not so much a consumer culture, so much as a borrower culture. People are much more willing, I think, in the US than in China to borrow, to buy something. I don't know about you, but I got a couple loans outstanding. I got a car loan. I have a roof loan, Joe. Okay. But like people in the US are willing to borrow to pay for things. I don't think that's the case in China. And if Xi Jinping is faced with this issue of trying to promote, trying to entice and get people to spend more, part of that is they have to be comfortable with borrowing more. I think they have to be comfortable enough in their future position. They, being an individual household, needs to be comfortable enough in their job to know that they'll be able to pay it off before they go and take out a loan. And then there's also a whole ecosystem of credit and stuff like that associated with that. Right now, if I wanted to get credit, for instance, when I got this roof, it just takes a few seconds for them to decide that I'm a reasonable credit. I don't know what the system they have over there for, but like, for Xi Jinping to come out, or at least in this 5-year plan, to acknowledge that loans and stuff like that is a problem. They might be bumping up against some, not even just technical issues with kind of figuring out the whole credit system, but then also cultural ones. It's not so much a consumer culture so much as a borrower.
Yeah, like China is a country of savers. That goes way back, right? That's like a deep kind of.
Yeah, you don't really know what that means. I think it's easier to think of it in terms of, well, they're not one of borrowers.
I actually, as kind of like a funny anecdote about that I remember, So at the end of undergrad, I also studied a little bit of China. I studied abroad there a semester. Like one of these intro storybooks I had, one of the first stories was talking about how the difference between Chinese and American families in terms of uh, buying a house. It was saying in America, you become an adult, you take out a loan, you buy a house. In China, it's like you become an adult, you work for 30 years, then you buy a house for your kids and you die. That was like the general takeaway. But it was, that's kind of stuck
Yeah.
with me in a way because, it's taking econ class as well. Savings rate in China is too high. And like it kind of, for what it's worth, is that something, at least to you, does that seem like, deeper within the social fabric itself kind of?
I guess again, it's been a while since I lived there, but I could see that. I just think the framing of it less so much as what's a savers culture. Like, what does that mean exactly? They just put money and they just try to get by with as little as possible and put it in their mattress, and instead thinking about it from the American side, which is we are very willing to borrow, we're able to borrow.
Well, I mean, I think the point is that, yeah, like rather than like you still want to buy the same thing, but instead of buying it today on a loan, you're willing to wait 30 years.
Which Americans are doing. Yeah, exactly. Right. One last idea that I wanted to leave you with for the 5-year plan. Why don't we do that? And then we'll wrap up and we won't do the capital things. We'll save that for next time. I think the capital one is more of a story in terms of why I don't read news anymore, why I don't read mainstream media. And I could probably pull it apart a little better if I had a bit more time. Maybe we'll make that as a clue next time. But to leave you with a thought for the 5-year plan, when I started looking at it again, and I'm looking at it keep in mind, I'm looking at it in the context of listening to some Elon Musk interviews and stuff. And the way he thinks about 5 years is like way in the future because things are happening so incredibly fast. When you think about it from that terms, to write this stuff down and to try to put goals for us to hit 5 years seems to be like you are tying your hands a little bit and you're no longer as flexible or as nimble maybe as you need to be in things that are changing so incredibly quickly. So maybe like, for example, maybe 100 years ago, this made sense because the world wasn't able to develop or change that much in 5 years. Whereas now, all of a sudden, Musk, for instance, is making predictions about putting up like some sort of mass driver on the moon in like 10 years, or he's going to build satellite clusters that are going to have AI attached to it in 5 years. I guarantee you, satellite cluster and things like that's not in here. I don't think that's going to be in the 5-year plan. It's not even in the realm of possibility when they wrote this. In that sense, I almost think as though this whole 5-year plan thing is sort of a weird or strange approach. Maybe they need to build in some sort of way to pivot just really quickly, or to like revisit. Can they revise it halfway through? Can you have like a 2.5-year plan halfway through and be like, oh shit, we forgot about this, and make that a priority? Like, how does that work? I mean, it seems like they're telling everyone below them, everyone in the party, all the local governments and stuff, these are the numbers that we want you to hit, go do it.
Yeah.
But if for whatever reason those don't make sense, how do you change that? So
Xi Jinping just says so.
Yes, yeah. So maybe we could just leave it just a little sneak peek for next time. I mean, this is, the Wall Street Journal comes out like a minute with an article after they publish this proposed rule, and they've already kind of framed what the whole capital story should be. And it's like, oh, the administration's coming out, they're going to be more lenient on banks, and this is in the context of private credit going to crap. What are they doing? This is nuts. And as someone, who's sort of in the industry and reads about this stuff, I just say this is a perfect example that we're going to dig into about the Gell-Mann amnesia effect, which is if you are in the industry and you read something that a journalist wrote, you can point all the mistakes and kind of things that they aren't really capturing very well. And you can say, oh, that's a bad article. I don't really trust this. Turn the page, read something that you do not know much about, like some sort of legal thing or medical thing, and then think that it's a well-written article and you are now fully informed. That's the amnesia part, because you're not. There's just as many mistakes in there. You just don't know them. So I think maybe next time we're going to go through an article from the Wall Street Journal, maybe Rutgers, that also covered the same thing. And I'm going to show you why I don't read mainstream media anymore. Not for political reasons. It's just like, this isn't the place to go to be informed. I think, not to toot our own horn here, but podcasts like this, when you actually can go talk to industry experts and they go into the details, they dig into the root, they get to the details, and they show the primary sources. And there has to be some nuance, and it has to be people who are in front of a camera and saying, I'm not sure about X, Y, and Z, but these are some of the questions I have, because the world's really complicated and people are not that smart. People, human beings, not as smart as we think we are. So anyway, I'll just leave that. I'll tell you why. We'll go through an article and I'll show you why. It's just like, things get incredibly technical. The proposed rule is like 150 pages, where very few people, including at a bank, would understand. This is like nuances on how GSIB capital surcharges are calculated. This is stuff only a couple people at a big bank would really understand. That's all that they deal with. You, Joe, aren't going to really know. I had to educate myself a little bit. I'm not a capital guy. So for like a journalist to not read it, there's literally no way they could have read 150 pages in the 2 minutes since they posted this thing and put this thing out, to really understand it. We knew it was coming. People knew it was coming. But like, nevertheless. So, and then, add a nice unflattering picture of Mickey Bowman in there, sensationalize it a little bit, give it to the editor, slap your hands a little bit. Bam, you're a journalist. No.
Veiled dishonesty.
It's not. I think so. I'll show you why I think it's dishonest. Because I think they knew it was dishonest too. I won't be able to point to any specific sentence and say it's factually incorrect, but they're writers and they understand what words mean. They understand what connotations they have, and they understand what ideas they're going to be putting into the minds of the reader. And those ideas are wrong. Anyway, and that's the manipulation thing. Even if the sentence is correct, I'll just give you like one example. Like, for them to say, the first sentence of this thing was, America's biggest banks will be allowed to hold billions of dollars less in capital on their books under a new proposal. The word billions, they know it just means big. It just means a lot. In this context, it's not a lot. Again, and maybe they're just intentionally writing this to be ambiguous, because it doesn't mean I don't know if they're talking about the biggest banks on average will hold billions or over the whole industry. Those are two very different ideas, and they're not addressed here. I think they mean over the entire industry to hold a few billion more in capital is nothing. When there's like, I think 25 trillion or something in assets, it's just a tiny little sliver. And there's like good reason for it, which we're going to get into.
Billions of dollars is just the unit of account when you're talking about these things, without a sense of scale.
Exactly. They steal the sense of scale. All they know is billions is big. They know the reader thinks it's big. So it's a lot and too much.
But in reality, like $1 billion to a GSIB is,
Yeah. What's the total asset size
money,
of like JP Morgan? 3.5 trillion total assets. JP.
Yeah, I want to say 10 is too high. It's definitely more
10 is too high. It's like 3 something. Oh my God. So it's like 4.42 trillion.
Billions less. That's 0.1% less.
Yeah. I mean, it's stuff like that. But again, this is how the manipulation happens without actually saying anything inaccurate. So we'll save that for next time. All right. You want to take us out?
Sounds good. Looking forward to it. And with that, thanks for tuning in to another episode. This has been the Root of All Evil podcast. I'm Joe.
I'm Luke.
And we will see you next week. See ya.